Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science channel. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've had a long day, or perhaps you're simply the kind of person who prefers drifting off to gentle whispers of nature's hidden wonders rather than counting sheep in endless circles. Either way, you're exactly where you need to be, and tonight's journey is especially for you. Tonight, we're going to walk together through one of Earth's most mysterious and ancient kingdoms, a realm that exists mostly hidden from view, weaving silently beneath our feet and through the shadows of forests. We're talking about mushrooms and fungi, those quiet architects of decay and renewal, those patient weavers of invisible networks that connect entire ecosystems in ways we're only beginning to understand. There's something deeply calming about fungi, isn't there? They don't rush. They don't demand attention. They simply exist in their own slow, persistent rhythm, breaking down what was, building up what will be, existing in that beautiful space between endings and beginnings. Tonight, as you settle into your pillow and let your breathing slow, we'll explore their world together, not with urgency or pressure, but with the same gentle patience that fungi themselves embody. Before we begin our journey into the forest floor and beyond, if you're enjoying this moment of peace, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel and perhaps leave a like. It helps others find these quiet moments too. But there's no pressure. You can simply close your eyes, let your body sink a little deeper into comfort, and allow these words to wash over you like soft rain on autumn leaves. Tonight, we have a collection of beautiful facts about mushrooms and fungi waiting for you, quiet truths and gentle revelations that will carry you softly towards sleep. There's no test tomorrow. No need to remember every detail. Just let the words flow through you like underground rivers, and if you drift away before the end, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. You're safe here. You're doing everything right. So take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and let's begin our gentle exploration of the fungal world. In the beginning, there were fungi, and they were among Earth's first explorers of land. Long before trees reached toward the sky or flowers painted meadows with color, fungi were already here, patiently colonizing the rocky shores of ancient continents. Scientists believe fungi may have first ventured onto land around 1.3 billion years ago, making them some of the planet's earliest terrestrial pioneers. Imagine that vast stretch of time, all those millions of years of quiet persistence, of slowly breaking down stone into soil, of creating the very foundation upon which all other land life would eventually flourish. They didn't do it quickly or loudly. They simply existed, generation after generation, transforming the world one microscopic thread at a time, preparing a home for everything that would follow. Tonight, as you rest, you're part of that same patient story. The word mushroom itself carries a gentle history, possibly derived from the Old French mousseron, which may have come from mousse, meaning moss. There's something poetic about this connection. Both mushrooms and moss often share the same damp, shadowed spaces. Both emerge quietly after rain. Both have that soft, earth-born quality that speaks of moisture and mystery. Language has a way of connecting things that belong together, and perhaps our ancestors noticed how mushrooms seem to rise from moss-covered ground like small, umbrella-shaped dreams. When you see a mushroom pushing through moss after a gentle rain, You're witnessing a scene that has inspired human naming and wonder for centuries. A scene so common, and yet so quietly magical that it needed its own special word. What we call a mushroom is actually just the fruiting body of a much larger organism hidden beneath the surface. The main body of a fungus is called the mycelium, a vast network of thread-like structures called hyphae that spread through soil, wood, or whatever substrate the fungus calls home. Think of it like an iceberg. The mushroom you see is just the tiny tip, while the real organism sprawls invisibly below, sometimes covering areas larger than football fields. This mycelium can persist for years, decades, even centuries, quietly growing and exploring its environment. The mushroom only appears when conditions are right, when the fungus is ready to reproduce and send its spores into the world. It's a temporary flowering, a brief moment of visibility for a creature that spends most of its existence in the dark, unseen realm beneath your feet. Some mycelial networks are truly ancient, having persisted for thousands of years. In the forests of Oregon, scientists discovered a single honey fungus organism that covers approximately 2,385 acres and may be over 2,400 years old, making it one of the largest and oldest living organisms on Earth. Imagine that, while empires rose and fell, while languages evolved and disappeared, while countless human generations lived their lives, this single fungal organism just kept growing, spreading slowly through the forest floor, connecting tree to tree, season after season. It was already ancient when Rome was founded. It was already vast when the first European explorers reached American shores. And tonight, as you drift towards sleep, it's still there, still growing, still patiently doing what it has always done, reminding us that some lives unfold on timescales we can barely comprehend. Fungi are neither plants nor animals but occupy their own unique kingdom of life. This middle realm has its own special characteristics. Fungi can't make their own food through photosynthesis like plants, but they also don't consume food and digest it internally like animals. Instead, they secrete enzymes into their environment, breaking down organic matter externally, then absorbing the resulting nutrients through their cell walls. It's a different way of being, a different approach to existence. They're the universe's patient digesters, the quiet transformers, turning what was into what will be. In a way, they teach us that there are many valid ways to exist, many strategies for survival, many paths through the forest of life. You don't have to be one thing or another. You can be your own category, your own unique expression, just as fungi have been for hundreds of millions of years. The underground networks of mycelium serve as nature's internet, allowing trees and plants to communicate and share resources in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. These fungal networks, sometimes called the wood wide web, can connect different trees and even different species, allowing them to exchange nutrients, water, and even chemical warning signals. A mother tree might send carbon to her offspring through fungal intermediaries. A tree under attack by insects might send out warning signals that travel through the mycelial network, alerting neighboring trees to boost their own defenses. It's a cooperative system, a community of mutual support happening silently beneath the forest floor. As you lie here, getting ready to sleep, beneath you, or beneath some forest, somewhere in the world, trees are sharing, helping, communicating through these fungal messengers, proof that connection and cooperation are woven into the very fabric of nature. Mushrooms can appear seemingly overnight, and there's something almost magical about it. You walk through a familiar patch of forest one day and see nothing but leaves and soil, then return the next morning after rain to find mushrooms standing everywhere, as if they've sprouted from dreams. This rapid appearance happens because the mycelium has been growing and accumulating resources underground for days, weeks, or even months. When conditions finally become right, the perfect combination of moisture, temperature, and other factors, the fungus can push up a mushroom remarkably quickly, sometimes in just a few hours. The mushroom doesn't grow so much as unfold, like an umbrella opening, like a thought suddenly becoming visible. It was always there in potential, waiting patiently below. The rain simply gave it permission to emerge, to show itself briefly before releasing its spores and fading back into the earth. There are an estimated 2.2 to 3.8 million species of fungi on Earth, yet scientists have formally described only about 150,000 of them. That means the vast majority of fungal diversity remains unknown, unnamed, unstudied. In every forest, beneath every meadow, there may be species no human has ever identified, living their quiet lives in complete anonymity. It's humbling, isn't it? In an age where we've mapped the genome and photographed distant galaxies, the majority of fungi remain mysterious. They're not hiding exactly. They're just being themselves, doing what fungi have always done, whether humans are watching or not. There's something comforting about that too. Not everything needs to be known, categorized, understood. Some mysteries can simply remain mysterious and the world keeps turning and mushrooms keep fruiting and everything works out just fine. Fungi play a crucial role in decomposition, breaking down dead organic matter and recycling nutrients back into the ecosystem. Without fungi, dead trees would accumulate indefinitely, fallen leaves would pile up endlessly, and nutrients would remain locked away in unusable forms. Fungi are nature's recyclers, her composters, her patient transformers of the old into the new. They take what seems finished and reveal that nothing is ever truly finished, just transformed, just rearranged, just waiting to begin again in a different form. A fallen log hosts fungi that gradually reduce it to rich humus, which feeds the seedlings that grow into the next generation of trees. It's a cycle that has no true beginning or end, just this eternal wheel of transformation that fungi help turn. As you prepare for sleep, you're also engaging in a kind of transformation, from waking to dreaming, from the day that was to the tomorrow that will be. Many fungi form symbiotic relationships with plants through specialized structures called mycorrhizae, where fungal hyphae connect with plant roots in mutually beneficial partnerships. The fungus receives sugars and carbohydrates from the plant's photosynthesis, while the plant gains enhanced access to water and nutrients that the far-reaching fungal network can extract from the soil. It's estimated that about 90% of land plants engage in these partnerships with fungi. In other words, the green world as we know it, the forests, the grasslands, the gardens, exists in intimate collaboration with an underground fungal realm. They need each other. They support each other. Neither could thrive without the other's gifts. It's one of nature's most successful partnerships, formed hundreds of millions of years ago and continuing in every forest on Earth tonight. Even cooperation, it seems, is ancient, fundamental, woven into life itself from the very beginning. Lichens, those beautiful crusty or leafy organisms you see on rocks and tree bark, are actually not single organisms, but rather a symbiotic partnership between fungi and algae or cyanobacteria. The fungus provides structure and protection, while the algae or bacteria provide food through photosynthesis. Together, they can survive in some of Earth's harshest environments, from Arctic tundra to hot deserts, from bare rocks to wind-blasted mountaintops. Lichens can shut down their metabolism during tough times and revive when conditions improve. They're patient survivors, waiting out the difficulties, not fighting or fleeing but simply enduring dormant until the world becomes hospitable again. Some lichens are thousands of years old, growing just a fraction of a millimeter each year, accumulating their history in rings and layers like living records of time. They remind us that survival sometimes means simply persisting, simply holding on, simply waiting with patience for better days. Certain fungi are bioluminescent, producing a soft, eerie green glow in the darkness of forests. These glowing mushrooms, found in various parts of the world, emit light through a chemical reaction similar to what makes fireflies glow. Imagine walking through a tropical forest at night and encountering these luminous mushrooms scattered across the forest floor or growing on fallen logs, casting their gentle radiance into the darkness like tiny lanterns placed by invisible hands. Scientists aren't entirely sure why these fungi glow. It may attract insects that help spread their spores, or it may serve some other purpose we haven't discovered yet. But the result is pure magic, living light, born from decay, illuminating the darkness with a glow that asks nothing of you except to notice, to wonder, to remember that beauty can emerge from the most unexpected places, even in the dead of night, even in the process of decomposition. The mushrooms we see come in an astonishing array of shapes and colors, from the classic red and white spotted fly agaric that looks like it belongs in a fairy tale, to the delicate white latticed clathrus that resembles a fragile cage, to the bright orange chicken of the woods that grows in shelves on tree trunks like something from a dream. There are mushrooms that look like brains, mushrooms that look like coral, mushrooms that look like birds' nests complete with tiny egg-shaped structures inside. Some are brilliant purple, others are deep indigo, some are pure white, and others are rich chocolate brown. This diversity isn't random showmanship. Different colors and shapes serve different purposes, attracting different spore dispersers, deterring different predators, adapting to different ecological niches. But to us, to human observers, they simply offer beauty. They ask nothing in return for their aesthetic gifts. They exist in their strangeness and loveliness whether we see them or not. Fungal spores are remarkably resilient and can survive extreme conditions that would kill most other life forms. Some spores can survive exposure to the vacuum of space, intense radiation, extreme heat, and extreme cold. They can remain dormant for years, decades, or even longer, waiting patiently for conditions suitable for germination. A single mushroom can produce billions of spores, releasing them into the air where wind, rain, and animals carry them to new locations. It's a numbers game, a patient strategy of abundance. Most spores will never germinate, never become mushrooms, never complete the cycle. But a few will land in just the right spot, where moisture and temperature and substrate all align. And from those few, new mycelium will grow, new networks will form, new mushrooms will eventually fruit. There's no despair in the millions that don't succeed. It's simply how the process works, generous, abundant, endlessly optimistic about possibility. Some fungi have evolved to be highly specific in their relationships and requirements. Certain mushrooms will only grow in association with certain tree species, their mycelium forming partnerships with particular roots, their biochemistry perfectly matched to specific hosts. The matsutake mushroom, prized in Japanese cuisine, grows only in symbiosis with certain pine trees and has resisted all attempts at cultivation. It exists only where it chooses to exist, forming partnerships only with the partners it recognizes, following rules we don't fully understand. There's something admirable about such specificity, such commitment to a particular way of being. Not all flexibility is virtue. Sometimes knowing exactly what you need, exactly where you belong, exactly who your partners are, that's its own form of wisdom. The matsutake teaches us that you don't have to grow everywhere, be everything, adapt to every circumstance. Sometimes it's okay to be particular, to be specialized, to exist fully and only in the places where you truly belong. Fungi are essential to many food and beverage production processes that humans have relied upon for thousands of years. Yeasts, which are single-celled fungi, ferment sugars to produce bread, beer, wine, and sake. Without these microscopic fungal workers, we wouldn't have leavened bread rising in ovens or wine aging in cellars or beer fermenting in breweries. Other fungi give us cheese with its incredible diversity of flavors and textures. The blue veins in Roquefort and Gorgonzola are actually edible mold, carefully cultivated and controlled. The earthy white coat on brie and camembert is fungal too, transforming the cheese as it ages. Soy sauce, miso, tempeh, all products of careful fungal fermentation. Fungi have been our partners in cuisine for millennia, helping us transform simple ingredients into foods rich with flavor and nutrition, asking nothing but the right conditions to do what they've always done, to transform, to break down, to create something new from what existed before. The world's largest living organism is a fungus, that honey mushroom in Oregon we mentioned earlier, stretching across thousands of acres. But pause and really consider what that means. Not the largest tree, not a blue whale, not a sequoia or an elephant. A fungus. An organism that exists mostly underground, invisible, its only visible parts being the seasonal mushrooms that fruit from its vast hidden body. This organism was already enormous when Shakespeare was writing plays, was already ancient when the pyramids were new. It has persisted through ice ages and warmings, through droughts and floods, through the arrival and departure of countless other species. It simply grows slowly, patiently, cell by cell, year by year, without hurry, without any apparent goal other than to continue existing, to keep growing, to persist. There's something profound about such simple, persistent existence. No drama, no crisis, just the quiet continuation of life doing what life does, living. Some fungi have evolved to manipulate the behavior of animals in ways that seem almost science fiction. The famous zombie ant fungus infects carpenter ants in tropical forests, gradually taking over their nervous systems and compelling them to leave their nests, climb to a specific height on vegetation, bite down on a leaf or stem, and remain there until they die. The fungus then fruits from the ant's head, releasing spores to infect other ants below. It sounds horrifying, but it's simply survival strategy, simply adaptation to a particular niche, no different from a flower producing nectar to attract pollinators. The fungus needs to spread its spores, and it has evolved a mechanism to do so. Nature is neither cruel nor kind, it simply is. And the ant, in its way, feeds the forest, returns to the soil, becomes part of the cycle. Everything serves, even in dying. Everything transforms, even in endings. You're doing beautifully. There's no rush here, no destination you must reach. If you've been listening closely, that's lovely. If your mind has been drifting, wandering through mushroom forests of its own imagination, that's lovely too. Perhaps your breathing has slowed. Perhaps your body has settled a bit deeper into rest. Notice if you're holding tension anywhere, in your jaw, your shoulders, your hands, and see if you can let it go just a little more. The fungi aren't rushing. They've been here for over 1 billion years, and they'll be here long after tonight. We have all the time in the world. Let yourself drift like a spore on a gentle breeze, not knowing where you'll land, trusting that wherever it is will be exactly right. Truffles, those expensive underground mushrooms that gourmets treasure, remain hidden beneath the soil, never emerging to see daylight. They've evolved to attract animals through their powerful aroma, a scent that some describe as earthy, musky, and utterly unique. In nature, wild boars and other animals dig up truffles, eat them, and spread the spores through their droppings. Humans have trained dogs and pigs to find these buried treasures. There's something almost mythical about it, a precious thing that grows in darkness, that never seeks the surface, that can only be found through scent by those who know what to search for. Truffles remind us that value doesn't require visibility. Some of the most precious things in life, love, wisdom, inner peace, also grow in hidden places, also require a particular kind of attention to find, also give off a subtle scent that only those who are paying attention will notice and follow to their source. Fungi have given humanity some of its most important medicines. The antibiotic penicillin, discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928, comes from the Penicillium mold, the same type of mold that might grow on forgotten bread or old fruit. That single discovery revolutionized medicine, saving countless millions of lives from bacterial infections that were once death sentences. Other fungi have provided drugs that suppress the immune system for organ transplants, that treat fungal infections, that may show promise in treating cancer and other conditions. The fungi weren't trying to help us. They produced these chemicals for their own purposes, likely as defenses against bacteria and competing organisms. But we've learned to use their chemical warfare for healing. It's another form of partnership, another way that fungi and humans have become entangled across evolution and history, each benefiting from the other's existence in ways neither planned. The study of fungi is called mycology. and it remains one of the less explored frontiers of biological science. Mycologists often speak about how much remains unknown, how many species await discovery, how many biochemical compounds produced by fungi have yet to be studied for their potential uses. Every year, researchers describe new species, discover new relationships, observe new behaviors. The fungal kingdom is like a vast library where most of the books remain unread, their contents mysterious and full of potential revelation. In some ways, it's exciting to live in a time when so much remains unknown. The world still holds mysteries. The forest floor still contains secrets. You could walk through the woods and potentially encounter a fungus that no scientist has ever formally described. Magic and science can coexist. Wonder and knowledge can be companions. Not everything is figured out. Not everything is known. Some mushrooms change dramatically from their youth to their maturity, almost like a butterfly's metamorphosis but in slow motion. A young shaggy mane mushroom, for instance, looks like a white, cylindrical cap covered in shaggy scales. As it matures, the cap begins to dissolve from the bottom upward, turning into black inky liquid that drips to the ground, carrying spores with it. Within hours or days, the entire mushroom has dissolved itself into nothing but spore-laden ink. It's called deliquescence, a kind of controlled, purposeful self-destruction that serves the purpose of reproduction. The mushroom doesn't see it as dying. It's simply completing its purpose, transforming itself one final time, becoming liquid, becoming scattered spores, becoming potential. We might learn something from this, that there's grace in transformation, that changing form doesn't mean ceasing to exist, that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is dissolve what we were so that we can become what we might be. Mushrooms are composed of about 90% water, which explains both their rapid appearance and their equally rapid decomposition. They're mostly water held in a delicate structure, temporary sculptures of moisture and flesh that exist for a brief window before collapsing back into the earth. This is why they appear so quickly after rain. They're inflating, essentially, pulling water from the mycelium and the surrounding soil, swelling up into their characteristic shapes. And this is why they fade so quickly. A few days of dry weather and they wither, or they release their spores and their purpose is fulfilled, so they simply decompose, returning their water and nutrients to the soil. It's a reminder of impermanence, of how much beauty exists in temporary things. A morning glory flower, a sunset, a rainbow, a mushroom, all here for a moment, all glorious in their brief existence, all returning to what they came from. Nothing lasts forever, and perhaps that's what makes things precious. In Japanese culture, mushrooms hold special significance and appear frequently in art, literature, and cuisine. The matsutake mushroom represents autumn and is celebrated in poems and seasonal dishes. Mushroom hunting is a beloved autumn activity, and certain mushrooms are given as prestigious gifts. There's something about this cultural reverence that feels appropriate, treating mushrooms not as mere ingredients or curiosities, but as worthy of attention, respect, appreciation. In autumn, when mushrooms fruit most abundantly, it's traditional to notice them, to seek them, to celebrate their arrival as you might celebrate the return of migrating birds or the blooming of cherry blossoms. What if we approached more of life this way? What if we noticed the small seasonal appearances, the quiet returns, the modest beauties that appear and disappear according to their own rhythms? What if we celebrated not just the dramatic and rare, but also the humble and regular? What if mushrooms, in their quiet way, are teaching us about attention, about appreciation, about finding wonder in what's easily overlooked? Fungi have been found growing in the radioactive ruins of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, thriving in conditions that would be lethal to most life. Some of these fungi even appear to use melanin, the same pigment that colors human skin, to harvest energy from radiation, somewhat similar to how plants use chlorophyll to harvest energy from sunlight. It's called radiosynthesis, and it's extraordinary. Life finds a way, even in the most hostile environments, even in places where we thought nothing could survive. These Chernobyl fungi aren't suffering or struggling. They're thriving, adapted, successful in their niche. They remind us that resilience can take forms we never imagined, that opportunity exists even in crisis, that even what seems like an ending can become, for some, a strange new beginning. As you lie here tonight, safe and comfortable, perhaps draw comfort from this. Life is persistent, adaptable, remarkable in its ability to continue, to adjust, to find ways forward that no one predicted. The morel mushroom is one of the most prized edible mushrooms, recognized by its honeycomb-like cap and nutty flavor. Morels are notoriously unpredictable, appearing in different locations from year to year, sometimes fruiting abundantly in areas recently disturbed by fire or construction, sometimes appearing in the same spot for years then vanishing without explanation. Mushroom hunters develop a kind of instinct for where morels might appear, returning to old haunts, exploring new possibilities, learning to read the subtle cues of landscape and season. But certainty remains elusive. The morels appear where and when they choose, following their own logic, rewarding patience and persistence more than knowledge or planning. There's something freeing about this unpredictability, about accepting that some things can't be controlled or guaranteed, about showing up and looking and hoping but not demanding, not expecting. The morels will come, or they won't. And either way, the spring forest is beautiful, and the looking is its own kind of reward. Mushrooms have been used in spiritual and religious ceremonies by various cultures for thousands of years. Certain species contain compounds that profoundly alter consciousness, and indigenous peoples in many parts of the world have used these mushrooms in healing rituals, vision quests, and spiritual practices. The ancient Mesoamericans called them Tiyananacatl, meaning flesh of the gods. These aren't recreational experiences but sacred ones, approached with reverence and intention, guided by tradition and wisdom passed down through generations. The mushrooms are seen as teachers, as doorways, as medicines for the soul. Modern science is now studying these compounds for their potential to help with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and other conditions, finding that ancient wisdom and contemporary research sometimes arrive at similar conclusions through different paths. The mushrooms, for their part, simply exist, producing the compounds they produce, indifferent to whether they're considered sacred or medicinal or both or neither, just being what they've always been. The fairy ring. a circle of mushrooms appearing in grass or forest floor, has inspired folklore and superstition across many cultures. These rings form because the mycelium grows outward from a central point in all directions, and the mushrooms fruit at the expanding edge of this circular growth. Some rings are centuries old and many meters in diameter, growing larger each year at a steady pace. European folklore often portrayed fairy rings as portals to fairy realms, or as dangerous places where fairies danced at night, warning people not to enter the circles lest they be enchanted or trapped. The truth, that they're simply the fruiting pattern of a radially growing organism, is in its own way as magical as any fairy story. A living circle, expanding slowly year by year, marking in mushrooms the otherwise invisible boundary of a subterranean network. Science and enchantment need not be enemies. Understanding the mechanism doesn't diminish the wonder. The ring is still there, still growing, still drawing its perfect circle in the grass. Mushrooms have an incredible ability to break down environmental pollutants, a process called mycormediation. Certain fungi can degrade petroleum products, pesticides, heavy metals, and other contaminants, transforming toxic substances into less harmful compounds. Researchers are exploring how mushrooms might be used to clean up polluted sites, to filter toxins from water, to break down plastics and other persistent waste products. The fungi aren't doing this to help us. They are simply using their enzymatic toolkit to access carbon and nutrients wherever they can find them. And it turns out that many pollutants that other organisms can't digest are perfectly accessible to fungal enzymes. Once again, we find partnership in unexpected places. We create problems, nature offers solutions. We contaminate, fungi remediate. The mushrooms ask nothing in return. They simply do what they do, and in doing so, they help restore balance to systems we've disrupted. There's a lesson here about reciprocity, about recognizing that we're not separate from nature but part of it, about remembering that help often comes from the most humble and overlooked sources. In traditional Chinese medicine, various fungi have been used for thousands of years to promote health and longevity. Rice, also called the mushroom of immortality, has been prized for its purported ability to calm the mind and strengthen the body. Cordyceps, the strange fungus that grows from the bodies of insects, has been used to boost energy and stamina. Modern research is now investigating the compounds in these and other medicinal mushrooms, finding complex polysaccharides, antioxidants, and other molecules that may indeed have beneficial effects on immune function, inflammation, and cellular health. The line between food and medicine has always been blurry in many traditional cultures. Let food be thy medicine, as the saying goes. Mushrooms straddle this line beautifully, being both nourishment and therapy, both everyday food and special healing agent, both ordinary and extraordinary depending on the species, the preparation, the context, the intention. They resist simple categorization, just as they resist being classified as plant or animal. They exist in their own space, offering their own gifts, patient and available to those who learn to recognize and use them wisely. The spores of mushrooms are so small and light that they can be carried enormous distances by wind and weather. A single mushroom might release its spores on a breezy autumn morning, and some of those spores might travel miles, even hundreds of miles, before settling to Earth. This is how fungi colonize new territories, how they spread across continents, how they arrive on remote islands and isolated mountaintops. It's a strategy of dispersal, of casting seeds to the wind and trusting that somewhere, at least a few will land in suitable conditions. Most won't, but most don't need to. It only takes one spore finding one favorable spot to begin a whole new network, a whole new mycelial body that might persist for decades or centuries. There's something hopeful about this approach to spreading life. Not clinging, not controlling, just releasing and trusting, just sending forth your potential and having faith that the world is large and opportunity exists somewhere, even if you can't know where. As you drift toward sleep, maybe you can release your own worries this way. Just let them go, cast them out, trust that somehow, somewhere, things will land where they need to. The color of a mushroom's spore print, the pattern of spores deposited when a cap is placed on paper overnight, is an important identification characteristic that mycologists use to distinguish between species. Spore prints can be white, cream, pink, brown, rust-colored, purple-brown, or black, and knowing the spore color helps narrow down the possibilities when identifying an unknown mushroom. There's something almost artistic about making spore prints, placing a mushroom cap on a piece of paper, waiting overnight, then lifting it to reveal the delicate radiating pattern of gills preserved in millions of microscopic spores. It's like a natural printing press, a living stamp, an artwork created not by human hands but by the mushroom's own reproductive process. Some people frame particularly beautiful spore prints, appreciating them as both scientific tool and accidental art. Nature is full of these dual-purpose beauties, things that serve practical functions but happen to be lovely in the process. Maybe we could learn from this too, to live our lives in ways that serve their purpose but also create beauty as a side effect, not because we're trying to impress anyone, but simply because function and beauty need not be separate. Some mushrooms exhibit a fascinating phenomenon called bioluminescent foxfire, where the mycelium in rotting wood glows with a soft greenish light. Old sailors and travelers told stories of ghostly lights in forests, of rotting logs that glowed in the darkness like phantoms. The explanation is biochemical. A luciferase enzyme reacting with luciferin, compound in the presence of oxygen to produce light. But even knowing the mechanism doesn't fully explain the why. What evolutionary advantage does glowing provide to the fungus? Some researchers theorize it attracts insects that then carry spores, or that it's a metabolic byproduct with no particular purpose. Either way, the result is enchantment. A log glowing softly in the forest dark, a natural lantern asking nothing of us except our wonder. Perhaps some things exist simply to remind us that the world is stranger and more beautiful than our everyday experience suggests. Perhaps magic is just the word we use for natural phenomena we find particularly delightful or mysterious. Perhaps foxfire is both perfectly explained and utterly enchanting, and holding both truths at once is what wisdom looks like. The study of fossil fungi reveals that mushrooms and their relatives have existed for at least 400 million years, and likely much longer. Ancient fungi helped break down the first forests, turned rock into soil, formed partnerships with the earliest land plants. They witnessed the age of dinosaurs, survived the mass extinctions, saw the rise of flowering plants and the emergence of mammals. They've been constant companions to life on land, adapting and evolving alongside other organisms, forming new partnerships, filling new niches, but always remaining essentially fungal in their approach, breaking down, recycling, connecting, existing in the spaces between, doing the work that needs doing without fanfare or recognition. When you hold a mushroom in your hand, you're touching a life form whose ancestors are ancient beyond imagining, whose survival strategies have been tested and proven across epochs of Earth's history. The mushroom is modern and ancient simultaneously, a contemporary expression of a form that has succeeded for hundreds of millions of years and shows no signs of stopping. Mushrooms have inspired countless fairy tales, legends, and artistic representations throughout human history. They appear in Alice in Wonderland, in Fantasia, in countless video games and fantasy illustrations. The archetypal red cap with white spots of the Amanita muscaria has become nearly synonymous with magic and enchantment in Western culture. There's something about mushrooms that invites imagination. Their sudden appearance, their sometimes bizarre forms, their association with decay and with forest shadows, the fact that some are poisonous while others are delicious, that some produce visions while others produce nutrition. They exist on boundaries, between beautiful and grotesque, between helpful and harmful, between the world we see and the world hidden beneath. Boundary creatures always attract stories, always inspire art, because they remind us that reality is more complex than our categories suggest, that nature doesn't respect our desire for simple classifications. The mushroom in the fairy tale is doing what all good symbols do, representing something true about the world, even if the story itself is fantasy. In nature, fungi often indicate the health of an ecosystem. A diverse community of mushrooms fruiting in a forest suggests healthy soil, good moisture, living trees with functioning root systems, and a complex web of relationships functioning properly. Conversely, the absence of mushrooms, or the presence of only a few opportunistic species, might indicate disturbance, pollution, or ecosystem stress. Mushrooms are like visible signs of invisible health, the fruiting bodies that tell you the underground network is thriving. They're nature's indicator species, are messengers about what's happening beneath the surface. When you see a variety of mushrooms in a forest, you can feel reassured that the forest itself is functioning well, that the cycles of decay and renewal are proceeding as they should, that the partnerships between trees and fungi and soil and water are intact. It's comforting in a way, these visible signs of invisible well-being, these assurances that beneath the surface, where you can't see, life is busy doing what life does best, which is continuing, adapting, thriving in its quiet, persistent way. The oyster mushroom is a carnivore of sorts, though its prey is nematodes, tiny worms that live in soil. The oyster mushroom's mycelium produces specialized structures that can trap nematodes, then penetrate and digest them. The fungus does this to obtain nitrogen, which can be scarce in the wood that oyster mushrooms typically colonize. It's a fascinating example of how fungi blur boundaries and defy expectations. We think of mushrooms as decomposers, as vegetarian recyclers, but here's one that actively hunts and consumes animals, albeit microscopic ones. Nature is full of these surprises, these moments when organisms refuse to fit neatly into the categories we've created for them. The oyster mushroom doesn't care about our definitions. It needs nitrogen, nematodes have nitrogen, and evolution has provided a mechanism to obtain it. Function follows need. Adaptation finds unexpected solutions. Life is endlessly creative in its strategies for survival, and the more we learn, the more we discover that the natural world is far stranger and more inventive than we ever imagined. Some mushrooms grow in perfect little clusters, like families huddled together, sharing the same root system, emerging at the same time from the same mycelial network below. Others grow as solitary individuals, lone fruiting bodies scattered across the landscape. There's no judgment in this. Both strategies work, both have their advantages. The cluster benefits from shared resources, from the mutual support of the network, from strength in numbers. The solitary mushroom spreads the risk, doesn't compete with neighbors for space or light, might access resources that a cluster would miss. As you lie here, maybe you can reflect on how both approaches to life have value. Sometimes we need community, connection, the support of others growing from the same ground. And sometimes we need solitude, independence, the freedom to grow in our own direction without competing or comparing. Mushrooms can teach us that there's no single right way, that diversity of approach is itself valuable, that the forest needs both clusters and solitaries, that you can be either and still be exactly what you're meant to be. Mushrooms contain nutrients that make them valuable food sources. They're low in calories but provide protein, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Certain mushrooms are particularly rich in B vitamins, which support energy and nervous system health. They contain ergothioneine, an antioxidant that some researchers call a longevity vitamin. They provide vitamin D, especially if they've been exposed to sunlight, since, like human skin, they can synthesize vitamin D when exposed to UV light. For thousands of years, humans have gathered mushrooms not just for their flavor, but for their sustenance, their nutrition, their contribution to a varied diet. A basket of autumn mushrooms represents stored sunlight, captured through the trees that the fungus partners with, transformed into fungal flesh that becomes human energy and growth. It's a chain of transformation and gift, sun to tree to fungus to human. Everything connected, everything feeding everything else, nothing isolated or independent. Even your dinner is a story of relationship, of partnership, of connection stretching from soil to sunlight and back again. The term toadstool is sometimes used to distinguish poisonous mushrooms from edible ones, though the distinction isn't scientific. It's folk terminology, varying by region and culture. The word itself suggests association with toads, those warty, mysterious amphibians that also inhabit damp places and appear in fairy tales. In reality, toads don't have a special relationship with poisonous mushrooms, but the language preserves an ancient sense that certain mushrooms are otherworldly, suspicious, best left alone. It's interesting how language carries these echoes of old beliefs, old warnings, old associations. When someone says toadstool instead of mushroom, they're using a word that has traveled through centuries of folklore, carrying with it the caution of ancestors who learned through hard experience which mushrooms could be eaten and which could kill. Language is itself a kind of mycelial network, connecting us to people long gone, their wisdom and fear and wonder encoded in the words we still use, often without thinking about where they came from or what they originally meant. The shiitake mushroom, now commonly found in grocery stores around the world, has been cultivated in Asia for over 1,000 years. Traditional cultivation involved cutting trees, inoculating the logs with shiitake spawn, and waiting patiently for the mushrooms to fruit from the bark. It was a partnership between human intention and fungal growth, a cooperation that required knowledge, patience, and respect for the mushroom's own requirements and timeline. Modern cultivation has refined the process, but it still relies on understanding what the fungus needs: the right wood substrate, the right moisture, the right temperature, the right timing for shocking the colonized logs to trigger fruiting. You can't force a mushroom to grow. You can only create conditions where it chooses to fruit, then wait. There's wisdom in this approach to cultivation, to partnership with the natural world. Provide what's needed, then be patient. Trust the process. Allow time for things to develop. Force doesn't work. Control is limited. What works is understanding, cooperation, patience, and respect for the mushroom's own nature and timeline. In some cultures, mushroom collecting is a cherished tradition passed down through families, with secret locations and hard-won knowledge shared from one generation to the next. The best spots for porcini, the reliable patches for chanterelles, the hidden grove where morels appear most springs. This knowledge is earned through years of walking, watching, returning, learning to read the forest's subtle signs. It's a different kind of wealth, this knowledge of place and season, this intimacy with landscape. It can't be bought or Googled or acquired quickly. It requires time, attention, relationship. The forest reveals its mushrooms to those who come back, who pay attention, who develop the patience and observational skill to notice where and when things grow. Maybe this is true of many of life's best things. They're not for sale, not available for delivery, not accessible through convenience. They require presence, patience, relationship, time. The mushrooms wait for those who care enough to look properly. And in teaching us to look, they teach us something larger about attention, about relationship, about how intimacy with place develops slowly over seasons and years, like mycelium spreading through soil. How are you feeling? Is your breathing a little slower now, a little deeper? Are your thoughts beginning to drift like spores on the wind, landing here and there without much effort or direction? That's perfect. That's exactly what's meant to happen. There's no test on this information tomorrow. There's no need to remember any specific fact or figure. These words are just here to keep you company as you transition from waking to sleeping, from the day you've lived to the rest you've earned. The mushrooms will still be there tomorrow, still quietly doing their work beneath the forest floor. For now, just let yourself sink a little deeper, release a little more tension. You're exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you need to do, which is nothing at all except breathing, resting, and drifting gently towards sleep. Some fungi form relationships with insects in sophisticated ways. Leafcutter ants, for example, don't eat the leaves they cut. Instead, they carry leaf fragments underground and use them as substrate to cultivate a specific fungus that the ant colony depends on for food. The ants are essentially farmers, tending their fungal gardens, removing contaminating fungi, pruning their crop, and harvesting the specialized structures the fungus produces for them to eat. When a queen ant leaves to establish a new colony, she carries a small sample of the fungus with her, ensuring that her new colony will have the crop it needs to survive. It's a relationship millions of years old, so interdependent that neither the ant nor the fungus can survive without the other. They've evolved together, shaped each other, become two parts of a single survival strategy. It's humbling to remember that humans aren't the only farmers, aren't the only species that cultivates and depends on other organisms. Agriculture is ancient, multi-species, sophisticated, existing in forms and places we rarely see. The puffball mushroom develops a papery outer skin that eventually ruptures to release its spores in a cloud of dust-like particles. When mature, a puffball releases its spores when rain hits it, or an animal brushes against it, or it's otherwise disturbed. Children sometimes step on puffballs deliberately to watch the spore cloud poof upward, calling them smoke balls or devil's snuff boxes, delighted by the visible proof of the millions of microscopic spores being released. It's a beautiful dispersal strategy, passive but effective, waiting for external force to provide the energy needed to launch spores into the air. The puffball doesn't need wind to carry its mushroom high. Instead, it waits near the ground and lets disturbance, raindrops, footfalls, falling branches, create the dispersal force. Different strategies for the same goal, different solutions to the same problem. Evolution is endlessly inventive, finding countless pathways to success, and none is inherently better than another. Each works in its context, each has advantages, each represents a viable way to ensure that life continues. Mushrooms are rich in umami, that fifth taste sensation that's savory and deeply satisfying. The umami in mushrooms comes from glutamates and other compounds that add depth and complexity to dishes. This is why mushrooms are so valued in vegetarian cooking. They provide some of the savory richness that people often associate with meat, making plant-based dishes feel more satisfying and complete. Dried mushrooms have even more concentrated umami, which is why a few dried porcini or shiitake can transform a soup or sauce, adding layers of flavor that seem to make everything more rounded and delicious. It's a gift mushrooms give to cooking, this taste enhancement, this savory depth. They're not the star of every dish, but they make other ingredients taste more like themselves, more vibrant, more present. There's a kind of humility and generosity in that, to enhance rather than dominate, to deepen rather than overwhelm, to add complexity that makes everything work better together. Perhaps we could learn from this approach to be enhancers, deepeners, supporters rather than always needing to be the main attraction, the center of attention, the loudest voice. In old-growth forests, dead standing trees, called snags, and fallen logs host an incredible diversity of fungi. These pieces of dead wood might seem like waste, like the forest's clutter that should be cleared away. but they're actually some of the most alive, most biodiverse elements of the ecosystem. A single rotting log might host dozens of fungal species, each occupying a different niche, each breaking down a different component of the wood, each at a different stage in the long process of returning the tree to soil. Beetles bore into the softening wood, birds excavate nest cavities, salamanders shelter beneath the bark. The log is a universe unto itself, and fungi are the primary architects of its transformation. This is why forest managers increasingly leave dead wood in the forest. It's not waste but resource, not clutter but habitat, not dead but absolutely teeming with life engaged in the patient work of transformation. Death feeding life, endings enabling beginnings, the old becoming the foundation for the new. Some mushrooms have medicinal properties that modern science is only beginning to understand and validate. Turkey tail mushroom, with its colorful concentric bands resembling a turkey's fan tail, contains polysaccharides that may support immune function and is being studied as a complementary therapy in cancer treatment. Lion's mane, with its cascading white spines, is being researched for potential benefits to cognitive function and nerve health. Chaga, growing as a black crusty mass on birch trees, has been used in traditional Russian and Scandinavian medicine for centuries, and is now being studied for its antioxidant properties. The research is ongoing, and claims should be made cautiously, but there's genuine scientific interest in what fungi might offer to human health beyond their nutritional value. These mushrooms have been producing their unique compounds for millions of years, not for our benefit, but for their own survival and success. That we might benefit too is a happy accident, a serendipitous overlap of their biochemistry and our needs, another form of partnership between fungi and humans. The concept of the wood wide web has captured public imagination in recent years as scientists have revealed the extent and importance of mycorrhizal networks. Ecologist Susan Simard's research has shown that trees in a forest aren't isolated individuals competing only for resources, but are connected through fungal networks that allow communication and resource sharing. A mother tree, large and well established, can send carbon to her seedlings through the fungal network. A tree under stress from drought might receive water from neighbors. A tree being attacked by insects can send chemical signals through the network, warning others to boost their defenses. This challenges the hyper-competitive view of nature as purely red in tooth and claw, revealing a more complex picture where cooperation and competition coexist, where individuals and communities are both important, where survival often depends not just on personal strength but on connection, communication, and mutual support. The forest is less like a battlefield and more like a community, and fungi are the infrastructure that makes community possible, the communication network that enables cooperation, the connection that transforms individuals into something larger and more resilient than any single tree could be alone. Mushrooms have an incredible ability to concentrate minerals from their environment, absorbing and accumulating elements from the soil or wood they're growing in. This is wonderful when the soil contains selenium or potassium or other beneficial minerals. The mushrooms become concentrated sources of these nutrients. But it also means mushrooms can accumulate heavy metals like cadmium or mercury if growing in contaminated areas. Mushrooms growing near roadsides might contain lead from decades of leaded gasoline use. This concentration ability is neutral. The mushroom isn't choosing beneficial over harmful, just accumulating whatever is available. It makes them useful for bioremediation of polluted sites, but it also means wild mushroom foragers need to be thoughtful about where they harvest. Nature is neither benevolent nor malevolent. Mechanisms serve multiple purposes. Every strength can be a vulnerability, depending on context. The mushroom teaches us that gifts come with responsibilities, that powerful abilities must be understood and respected, that there's no simple good or bad, just characteristics that can manifest helpfully or harmfully, depending on circumstances and choices. The jelly fungus called wood ear is commonly used in Asian cuisine and traditional medicine. It has a distinctive gelatinous texture and mild flavor, mainly used for its unique mouthfeel rather than its taste. When dried, it becomes hard and brittle, but rehydrates in water to return to its jelly-like state. There's something almost magical about this transformation. From tough dried fragment to soft translucent petal, from preserved to living seeming through the simple addition of water. The wood ear demonstrates the resilience and patience that fungi embody, able to dry out completely, to seem dead, to wait in a dormant state, then revive fully when conditions improve. It's a strategy for surviving hard times, for outlasting difficulty, for not needing things to be perfect all the time, but simply waiting with patience for conditions to improve. Maybe there's wisdom here for us too, that it's okay to contract during difficult times, to conserve energy, to wait in a dormant state knowing that you'll expand and return to activity when the time is right. You don't have to be growing and active and engaged all the time. Sometimes waiting itself is the wisest strategy. Mushrooms have been deliberately cultivated by humans for at least 2,000 years, though likely much longer. The button mushroom, so common in grocery stores, along with its mature forms, the cremini and portobello, is a single species that has been selected and bred for cultivation, growing on composted manure in climate-controlled environments. Growing mushrooms commercially is part science, part art, requiring careful attention to temperature, humidity, air flow, and substrate composition. Too much of anything and contaminating fungi take over. Too little and the desired mushrooms won't fruit. The cultivator must create conditions that favor the crop while discouraging competitors, then trigger fruiting at the right moment. It's a partnership, a negotiation between human intention and fungal nature. The mushroom will only cooperate if conditions meet its requirements. You can't bully a mushroom into growing. You can only understand what it needs, provide that as best you can, and then wait to see if the mushroom agrees that it's time to fruit. There's humility in this kind of work, a recognition that you're not in complete control, that success requires understanding and cooperating with another organism's nature, not imposing your will upon it. The destroying angel and death cap mushrooms are among the most toxic mushrooms to humans, containing amatoxins that cause severe liver and kidney damage. These beautiful white mushrooms can resemble edible species, which has led to tragic poisonings when foragers mistake them for safe mushrooms. There's no universal rule for identifying poisonous mushrooms, No simple test like checking if they tarnish silver or if animals eat them. The only safe approach is to learn each species individually, to know the dangerous ones as thoroughly as the edible ones, to never eat a mushroom unless you're absolutely certain of its identification. The mushrooms aren't evil or malicious. They're simply protecting themselves with chemical defenses against being eaten, which works very well against most animals. That humans occasionally mistake them for food is our problem, not theirs. They're just being mushrooms, existing as they always have, producing the compounds they produce, neither trying to hurt us nor trying to help us, just being themselves and leaving us the responsibility to learn, to be careful, to respect their power to harm. Chicken of the woods is a bright orange mushroom that grows in shelf-like clusters on trees and is prized by foragers for its texture and flavor, which some say resembles chicken. It's a parasitic fungus, attacking living trees or feeding on dead wood, and when fresh and properly cooked, it provides a meaty texture that makes it popular in vegetarian cooking. The bright orange color makes it relatively easy to spot and identify, and it's distinctive enough that dangerous lookalikes are rare. It's one of those mushrooms that makes foraging accessible to beginners, a gateway into the world of wild mushrooms, a first successful harvest that turns mushroom curiosity into mushroom passion. There's joy in finding food growing wild, in recognizing and harvesting something that nature offers freely to those who know where to look. It connects us to older ways of living, to knowledge our ancestors took for granted, to the satisfaction of gathering rather than just purchasing. Even in a modern life, we can experience moments of this older relationship with the land, where forests offer gifts to those who learn their language, who pay attention to seasons and locations, who develop eyes for seeing what's available to be gathered by the patient and the informed. Some mushrooms can literally glow in the dark, creating an eerie, magical light in forests at night. The bioluminescence occurs through a chemical reaction that produces light as a byproduct. About 80 species of mushrooms and fungi are known to be bioluminescent, mostly tropical species. The ghost fungus in Australia produces a bright greenish glow. The bitter oyster in Europe and North America glows faintly green. The phenomenon has been known for centuries. Sailors and travelers spoke of mysterious lights in forests, rotting logs that glowed like coals, mushrooms that lit up the night. Science has explained the mechanism but not entirely the purpose. Why do these mushrooms glow? Does it attract spore-dispersing insects? Is it a byproduct of metabolism with no particular function? Or does it serve some purpose we haven't discovered yet? The mystery remains partially unsolved, and the beauty remains completely intact. A glowing mushroom in the darkness is still one of nature's small miracles, still worth pausing to appreciate, still capable of evoking wonder even in those who understand the biochemistry behind the light. Mushrooms play a crucial role in forest regeneration after disasters like fires or logging. Pioneer species of fungi quickly colonize disturbed areas, beginning the work of breaking down debris, stabilizing soil, and preparing conditions for other organisms to return. Some mushrooms, like morels, actually fruit more abundantly in recently burned areas, appearing in large numbers the spring following a fire. They're not attracted to the fire itself, but to the changed conditions, the cleared canopy allowing more light, the ash enriching the soil, the dead wood providing abundant substrate. These fungi are nature's cleanup crew, her reset button, the organisms that begin the process of turning disaster back into life. They remind us that nature is resilient, that ecosystems have evolved mechanisms for recovery, that endings create the conditions for beginnings. A burned forest looks like devastation, and it is. But it's also opportunity, transformation, a blank canvas being prepared. And the mushrooms are among the first artists to start sketching the next version of the forest, the next iteration of life, the next expression of what might grow there. The concept of mycophilia describes love of fungi, while mycophobia describes fear or distrust of them. Different cultures fall on different points of this spectrum. Many European cultures, especially Slavic and Mediterranean ones, have rich traditions of mushroom gathering and deep mycological knowledge. British culture has historically been more mycophobic, with widespread distrust of wild mushrooms and preference for only the most obviously safe cultivated varieties. These cultural attitudes are passed down through generations, shaping how people see the fungi they encounter. It's interesting how culture can create such different relationships with the same organisms. A mushroom that Russians eagerly gather and celebrate might be one that Britons step over with suspicion. The mushroom itself is neutral. It's our stories, our history, our inherited attitudes that determine whether we see threat or treasure, danger or dinner. Maybe we all have areas of life where we carry inherited attitudes worth examining, where our responses are shaped more by cultural story than by direct experience or current evidence. The mushrooms invite us to question, what are we afraid of because we were taught to be afraid, and what might we be missing because of those unexamined fears? Mushrooms have been found at altitudes of over 18,000 feet in the Himalayas and in some of the driest deserts on Earth. Fungi are remarkably adaptable, having colonized nearly every terrestrial environment on the planet. There are aquatic fungi in oceans and rivers, fungi living in the digestive systems of animals, fungi surviving in Arctic ice and Antarctic soil. This global distribution speaks to the fundamental success of the fungal strategy. Being able to digest externally, to exist primarily as microscopic threads requiring little structure, to reproduce through microscopic spores that can travel vast distances and remain viable for long periods. Fungi don't conquer new environments through force or speed, but through patience, adaptability, and the ability to wait. A spore can sit dormant for years until conditions are right, then germinate and begin the slow work of growing, establishing, eventually fruiting. It's an approach to life that has worked everywhere from tropical rainforest to Arctic tundra, from alpine meadow to desert soil. Success doesn't require dominating every environment immediately. Sometimes it just requires being able to wait, to persist, to take advantage of opportunities when they arise, to be patient and adaptable and remarkably, quietly persistent. The symbiotic relationship between orchids and fungi is so intimate that orchid seeds cannot germinate without fungal partners. Orchid seeds are tiny, essentially just embryos with minimal stored energy. They require a fungal partner to invade their tissues and provide the carbon and nutrients needed for the embryo to develop. The relationship is complex. The fungus invades, the orchid digests some of the fungus. The fungus continues growing. The two reach a balance where both benefit or at least tolerate the arrangement. Without this partnership, orchids couldn't reproduce in the wild. This means every orchid you've ever seen exists because of a partnership with a fungus, a cooperation that begins at the moment of germination and may continue throughout the orchid's life. It's a reminder that what looks like an individual organism is often actually a community, a partnership, a relationship between multiple species. The boundaries between individuals, between species, are more fluid than we often acknowledge. The orchid and its fungus are separate species, yes, but they're also, in a real sense, one system, one partnership, one expression of life that neither could accomplish alone. Some fungi are parasitic, attacking living plants or animals and feeding on living tissue. The honey mushroom can be a devastating parasite of trees, its mycelium invading root systems and slowly killing even large, healthy trees. Cordyceps fungi attack insects, invading their bodies, consuming them from within, then fruiting from the dead insect's body. These relationships seem cruel from the victim's perspective, but they're simply another expression of life feeding on life, no different morally than a bird eating a worm or a deer eating grass. The fungus needs to survive and reproduce, and parasitism is its strategy. It's neither good nor evil, just functional. These parasitic fungi also play roles in regulating populations, removing weak or old individuals, cycling nutrients, creating snags and fallen logs that host other species. Death feeds life. Endings enable beginnings. The parasitic fungus isn't a villain in nature's story. It's simply another character, another role, another necessary function in the endless cycling of matter and energy through the ecosystem. Nature isn't moral or immoral. It simply is, and everything has its place, its function, its role in the larger patterns that keep the system functioning. In some indigenous cultures of Mesoamerica, mushrooms appear in ancient art and codices, suggesting that their use in ceremonies and healing practices extends back thousands of years into pre-Columbian times. Stone sculptures of mushrooms have been found at archaeological sites, indicating the cultural importance of these fungi. The knowledge of which mushrooms to use, how to prepare them, and in what context was sacred knowledge, passed through lineages of healers and shamans, used with ceremony and intention. When Spanish colonizers arrived, they often suppressed these practices, viewing them as pagan or threatening. Much knowledge was lost or driven underground. Modern ethnomycologists work with indigenous communities to document and preserve this traditional knowledge, recognizing that it represents thousands of years of careful observation, experimentation, and wisdom about the properties and uses of local fungi. It's a reminder that scientific knowledge isn't the only kind of knowledge, that other cultures have developed their own sophisticated understandings of the natural world, that wisdom can take many forms, and that we lose something precious when we dismiss or destroy traditional knowledge systems in favor of only one way of knowing. You're more than halfway through now, though you may not have noticed. Time gets a little liquid when you're relaxing deeply, doesn't it? Maybe you've drifted off occasionally, caught only fragments of what's been said. That's perfect. That's exactly what these words are for, to be a soft river carrying you gently toward sleep, not demanding your full attention, just providing a current, a flow, a gentle momentum in the direction of rest. If you're still listening, hello. If you've already drifted into dreams, then these words are just whispers in the background, harmless and soft. Either way, you're doing beautifully. Let your jaw relax a bit more. Let your breathing deepen. Notice how comfortable you are, how heavy your body feels, how easy it would be to just slip a little further into sleep. The mushrooms are still there, still growing, still transforming the forest floor. And you're still here, still breathing, still drifting gently toward the rest you deserve. The matsutake mushroom's complex, spicy aroma has been described as similar to cinnamon or pine, and it's so prized in Japan that high-quality specimens can sell for hundreds of dollars each. The mushroom only grows in symbiosis with certain pine trees, and its mycelium can take years to establish and mature enough to produce fruiting bodies. It cannot be cultivated commercially. All matsutake comes from wild harvest, found by skilled foragers who know the forests, the seasons, the subtle signs that indicate where these mushrooms might appear. The difficulty of finding them, combined with the strong cultural significance and exquisite flavor, creates their high value. But perhaps there's something beyond economics happening here. A recognition that some things can't be mass-produced, can't be hurried, can't be forced or domesticated. The matsutake grows where and when it chooses, following its own schedule, forming partnerships only with specific trees, appearing only for those patient and skilled enough to find it. It's a creature of its own terms, and perhaps there's something valuable in that too, in things that resist commodification, that maintain their wildness, that require us to come to them rather than them coming to us. Mushroom cultivation has become an important economic activity in many parts of the world, providing livelihoods for farmers who grow shiitake, oyster, button, and specialty mushrooms. It's sometimes promoted as a climate-smart agricultural option because mushrooms can be grown in vertical stacks, using agricultural waste products as substrate, producing food protein efficiently with relatively low water and land requirements compared to many other food production systems. Mushroom farming can turn sawdust, straw, coffee grounds, and other waste materials into nutritious food. It's a kind of alchemy, waste into value, discarded into desired. The farmers provide conditions, inoculate the substrate, maintain humidity and temperature, and the fungi do what they've always done: break down organic matter and transform it, but in this case producing food for human consumption as part of the process. It's partnership agriculture, working with fungal nature rather than trying to dominate it, and it represents one small piece of how humans might feed growing populations while working more cooperatively with natural processes rather than against them. The smell of mushrooms is distinctive, earthy, sometimes nutty, occasionally unpleasant if the mushroom is old or the species naturally smells odd. This smell comes from volatile compounds the mushroom produces, sometimes for purposes we don't fully understand. Some mushrooms smell like anise, others like garlic, some like maple syrup, and some unfortunately like rotting flesh. The stinkhorn mushroom produces a truly foul odor that attracts flies, which then spread its spores. It's essentially using the same strategy as carrion flowers, mimicking something dead to attract insects. The smell that repulses humans is attractive to flies, and the mushroom doesn't care about human opinion. It only cares about getting its spores dispersed. And if smelling like death accomplishes that, then death smell it is. It's another reminder that nature isn't here for our aesthetic pleasure, that organisms evolve strategies that work for them regardless of what we find pleasant or unpleasant. The stinkhorn teaches a kind of freedom, to be fully yourself, to use whatever strategies work, to not worry about being liked or found pleasant, to simply do what you need to do to accomplish your purpose, to trust that the right allies will find your signal attractive even if others find it repulsive. Mushrooms have been used to make dyes for coloring fabric, producing a range of beautiful, subtle colors from yellows and oranges to blues and greens, depending on the species used and the mordant applied. Before synthetic dyes became common, natural dyers knew which mushrooms produced which colors, gathering them from forests and fields to use in their craft. The colors produced by mushroom dyes tend to be soft and earthy, forest floor colors, autumn colors, colors that seem to carry something of the woods within them. There's a poetry to wearing fabric dyed with mushrooms, carrying the forest's colors on your body, adorned with the gift of fungi transformed into hue. It's another use, another gift, another way that humans have found to partner with these organisms. We eat them, we take their medicine, we use them to clean pollution, and we also take their color, extracting pigments and fixing them to fiber, creating beauty from decay, wearing transformation as clothing. Mushrooms give and give, not because they're generous but simply because they exist, producing compounds for their own purposes that we've learned to recognize as valuable, useful, beautiful for our own purposes. The network structure of mycelium has inspired computer scientists, urban planners, and engineers. Mycelial networks are extremely efficient at resource distribution, forming connections that balance short, direct paths with redundant alternative routes, creating resilient networks that can continue functioning even when parts are damaged. This same network topology shows up in efficient computer networks, subway systems, and even the structure of the Internet. Nature has been solving optimization problems for millions of years, and mycelium represents one elegant solution to the challenge of how to efficiently connect many points, distribute resources, and maintain resilience in the face of disruption. Scientists studying mycelial networks have developed algorithms inspired by fungal growth, using fungal logic to solve human problems. It's biomimicry, learning from life, studying the solutions evolution has already developed, recognizing that nature has run experiments on timescales we can't match, and has found strategies worth learning from. The mycelial network is teacher, inspiration, model, not because the fungus intends to teach us anything, but because we're wise enough to pay attention and learn from success when we see it. Some mushrooms are incredibly beautiful, looking more like flowers or coral than what we typically imagine as fungi. The indigo milk cap oozes bright blue milk when cut. The bleeding tooth fungus appears to ooze bright red liquid from its white surface. The violet coral fungus stands in purple branches like underwater coral, transported to the forest floor. The bird's nest fungus forms perfect little cups with egg-shaped structures inside. The bleeding fairy helmet looks like tiny red caps scattered across bark. These aren't trying to be beautiful for our benefit. The colors and forms serve fungal purposes, attracting or deterring, protecting or signaling. But we get to experience their beauty anyway, to notice and appreciate and wonder at the sheer variety of forms that fungi take. It's a gift we didn't earn and don't deserve. This beauty that exists whether we notice it or not. That asks nothing of us except perhaps our attention, our appreciation, our willingness to pause and acknowledge that the world is full of wonders. That strange beauty exists everywhere if we slow down enough to see it. That even the forest floor, even decay, even the patient work of decomposition can be adorned with color and form that takes our breath away. Mushroom hunting requires specific knowledge and caution, but it connects people to landscapes in deep ways. Regular mushroom foragers develop intimate knowledge of particular places, which groves host which species, which years were good or poor for different mushrooms, how weather patterns affect fruiting. They notice things that others miss. The slight variations in terrain that indicate where chanterelles might grow, the types of trees that host prized boletes, the smell of earth after autumn rain that promises mushrooms will appear. This knowledge comes only through time, attention, and repeated visits. You can't learn it from books alone. You have to walk the land, return to places season after season, develop relationship with particular forests and meadows. In this way, mushroom hunting is less about the mushrooms and more about becoming the kind of person who knows a landscape deeply, who has developed eyes for seeing subtle variations, who has earned intimacy with place through patience and attention. The mushrooms are the reward, but the real gift is the relationship with the land, the knowledge that comes from paying attention, the way you become someone who truly sees the forest rather than just walking through it. Fungi existed before flowers, before grasses, before most of what we think of as the plant kingdom in its modern form. They witnessed and helped enable the greening of the planet, the transformation of bare rock into soil that could support life. In a real sense, plants exist on a foundation that fungi created. The first plants to colonize land likely couldn't have done so without fungal partners helping their roots access nutrients. The forests that eventually covered continents grew from soil that fungi helped create. It's humbling to remember that the green world, the oxygen-rich atmosphere, the incredible diversity of plant life we depend on, all of it developed in partnership with fungi, through cooperation between different kingdoms of life. The fungus wasn't trying to make the world habitable for humans who wouldn't exist for hundreds of millions of years. It was simply doing what fungi do, and the consequence was a transformed planet. Sometimes the most important work is done without intention, without awareness of larger consequences, simply by organisms faithfully doing what they've evolved to do, trusting that their small role contributes to something larger they'll never see complete. When you touch a mushroom, you're touching mostly water held in delicate cellular structures. The mushroom is mostly empty space and moisture, incredibly lightweight for its size. fragile in many ways yet strong enough to push through compacted soil or lift aside leaves and pebbles. There's something almost miraculous about this combination of delicacy and strength. The mushroom is soft, yielding, easily damaged, yet it can exert surprising force when growing. Its cells swelling with water pressure to push upward, breaking through barriers, reaching for the surface. Perhaps there's something to learn from this. That strength doesn't always mean hardness, that persistence and softness can coexist, that you can be gentle and yielding and still accomplish remarkable things. The mushroom doesn't harden itself to push through obstacles. It stays soft, stays mostly water, and succeeds through patience and steady pressure rather than force. Gentle persistence, soft determination. Maybe these are underrated qualities. Maybe the mushroom understands something about power that we often forget. Mushroom spores are everywhere in the air around us, floating invisible in every breath. Right now, as you lie here listening, countless fungal spores are drifting through the room, landing on surfaces, most of them finding conditions unsuitable for growth and simply remaining dormant or dying. We're constantly surrounded by the potential for fungi. They're not distant or rare but ever present, waiting for the right conditions. A spore might sit dormant for years, then germinate when conditions finally align. It's patient, asking nothing, demanding nothing, simply waiting. This is how fungi have succeeded, not through aggression or urgency but through abundance and patience, being everywhere, waiting until the moment is right, then growing when opportunity appears. Maybe there's wisdom here about how to move through life, to be present, to be ready, to wait with patience for the right moment rather than forcing things, to trust that when conditions are right, growth will happen naturally, almost effortlessly, because you've positioned yourself correctly and prepared yourself adequately, and now you're simply allowing what's ready to emerge to do so. The word fungus comes from the Latin, possibly derived from Greek sphangos meaning sponge, which makes sense given the often spongy or porous texture of many mushrooms. The Greeks and Romans gathered and ate mushrooms, had theories about where they came from, celebrated some species as delicacies. Ancient peoples around the world independently discovered which mushrooms could be eaten, which could heal, which could harm, which could alter consciousness. This knowledge was hard-won, learned through careful observation, likely through some tragic experimentation, passed down as precious information essential for survival and well-being. The names we use, the categories we create, the knowledge we hold, all of it has history, all of it represents accumulated wisdom. All of it connects us to people long gone who also wondered about these strange organisms, who also paused to notice mushrooms appearing after rain, who also had to figure out which to gather and which to avoid. When you see a mushroom, you're seeing something your ancestors saw, wondered about, made decisions about. That continuity is profound. The mushroom connects you not just to the ecosystem around you, but to human history stretching back millennia. Some mushrooms grow in the strangest places, appearing from cracks in sidewalks, pushing through asphalt, emerging from potted plants that have been indoors for years. These appearances seem miraculous, but they simply mean that spores are everywhere. Mycelium can colonize any organic matter, and when conditions are right, Mushrooms will fruit regardless of whether the location seems appropriate or convenient. A mushroom growing through pavement is displaying the same patient persistence that allows fungi to colonize bare rock, to break down the most resistant materials, to find opportunity in places that seem inhospitable. It's a kind of optimism, or would be if mushrooms had emotions. This willingness to try, to grow where planted, to make the best of whatever substrate is available, to fruit even in unlikely places. The pavement mushroom isn't complaining that it's not in a forest. It's simply growing where it is, doing what it does, being fully mushroom regardless of circumstances. There's something admirable in that. The ability to be fully yourself wherever you find yourself, to not wait for perfect conditions but to work with what's available, to find opportunity in unexpected places, to trust that where you are is where you need to be, at least for now. Mushrooms remind us that there's an entire world of activity happening at scales and speeds that don't match human perception. The mycelial network is always growing, always exploring, cells dividing and hyphae extending at rates we can't see in real time. The chemical conversations between fungi and plant roots happen continuously, but invisibly. Spores drift everywhere but remain unseen. The entire life cycle of many fungi happens beneath the surface, with only the brief fruiting of mushrooms providing visible evidence of all that hidden activity. We walk through forests completely unaware of the vast networks beneath our feet, the partnerships being enacted, the resources being exchanged, the slow, patient work of transformation being carried out by organisms we rarely see and often don't think about. It's humbling, this reminder that so much of what's important happens beyond our perception, that visibility isn't the same as significance, that the most essential work is often done quietly, slowly, out of sight, by those who never seek credit or recognition. The forest's foundation is fungal, and we only see the tiniest fraction of what makes it all work. In some traditions, the mushroom is a symbol of transformation, rebirth, and the cycle of life, death, and renewal. This symbolism makes perfect sense. Mushrooms emerge from death, feeding on what was, transforming it into something new. They're intermediaries between endings and beginnings, existing in that liminal space between what's no longer and what's not yet. They take the fallen tree and turn it into soil. They take the dead leaves and return nutrients to living roots. They're proof that death isn't an ending but a transformation, that what seems finished is actually just changing form, preparing to become something else. For people who have experienced loss, who have gone through difficult endings, who have felt the grief of things falling apart, the mushroom offers a particular kind of hope, not the naive hope that things will go back to how they were, but the deeper hope that what falls apart becomes the foundation for what grows next. That decay is part of creation, that endings and beginnings are not opposites but partners in an eternal dance of transformation. The mushroom doesn't deny death. It works with death, transforms death, reveals death as part of life, not its opposite. The truffle's underground lifestyle has made it a symbol of hidden treasure, rare value found through persistence and knowledge rather than obvious visibility. Truffle hunters in France and Italy guard their secret locations, train animals to help them search, pass knowledge through families and tight-knit communities. Finding truffles requires understanding the trees they partner with, the soil conditions they prefer, the seasonal timing of fruiting. It requires patience, skill, attention, and often a bit of luck. The treasure isn't just sitting on the surface waiting to be picked up, it's hidden, requiring effort and knowledge to obtain. Maybe this is true of most valuable things in life. They're not obvious, not easily obtained, not sitting on the surface. They require some digging, some searching, some development of skill and attention. They reward those who care enough to learn, to persist, to develop relationship with the landscape or practice or community that holds them. The truffle doesn't make itself easy to find. It remains underground, following its own nature, and those who want to find it must come on its terms, must learn its language, must develop the skills necessary to recognize where it might be hidden. There's dignity in that, in being something that must be sought rather than something that advertises itself, something that maintains its mysterious nature even while being valuable. Fungi appear in poetry and literature as symbols of the mysterious, the hidden, the liminal, the between spaces. They emerge in Gothic tales and fairy stories, in magical realism and nature writing. Writers use mushrooms to evoke damp forests, autumn, decay, mystery, transformation, hidden networks, secret knowledge. The mushroom is somehow both ordinary and magical, common enough that everyone has seen them, but strange enough that they maintain an air of otherness, of not quite explained. Even when we understand their biology, they retain this quality. Perhaps it's because they exist on boundaries, between visible and invisible, between life and death, between individual and network, between plant-like and animal-like while being neither. Boundary creatures always attract story, always inspire imagination, because they remind us that our categories are imperfect, that reality is more complex than our boxes, that mystery persists even in what we think we understand. The mushroom in literature is doing what all good symbols do, representing something true about existence, about transformation, about the hidden depths beneath visible surfaces, about the strangeness that persists even in the familiar. Some mushrooms have co-evolved with specific animals in precise partnerships. Ambrosia beetles bore into trees and cultivate specific fungi in their tunnels, feeding their larvae on fungal gardens. Neither the beetle nor the fungus could complete its life cycle without the other. These relationships are ancient, specific, essential to both partners. They're examples of how interconnected life truly is, how what looks like separate species are actually parts of larger systems, dependent on each other in ways that have been worked out over millions of years of evolution. We talk about individuals and species as if they're discrete, separate things, but the more we learn about ecology, the more we discover that boundaries are fuzzy, that organisms are communities, that individual might not be the most useful way to think about life. The beetle and its fungus are two species, yes, but they're also one system, one partnership, one expression of life that neither could achieve alone. Maybe we're more like this than we usually acknowledge, dependent on partners we rarely think about, from the bacteria in our guts to the fungi on our skin, to the relationships that shape us. Each of us less an individual than a community, less a separate thing than a node in countless networks of relationship and dependence. Mushroom foraging guides always emphasize the same rule. Never eat a wild mushroom unless you're 100% certain of its identification. There's no margin for error, no room for probably or most likely. Certainty or nothing, because the consequences of being wrong can be severe: illness, organ damage, death. This required certainty teaches a kind of humility, a recognition that confidence isn't enough, that you must know, really know, not guess or assume. It makes mushroom identification a practice of careful attention, of checking multiple characteristics, of consulting references, of learning not just what something is but also what it might be confused with. This carefulness, this insistence on certainty, this refusal to gamble, maybe we could apply this to other areas of life. What else do we approach with assumption rather than knowledge, with confidence rather than certainty? Where else might we benefit from the mushroom forager's caution, from the practice of really knowing before acting, from the humility to admit when we're not sure and the patience to wait until we are? The poisonous mushroom doesn't punish you for arrogance. It simply has its nature, its chemical defenses, and if you eat it despite uncertainty, the consequences follow naturally from your choice. The mushroom teaches responsibility, caution, and the wisdom of knowing your limits. Your breathing has probably become quite slow and deep by now, hasn't it? Maybe your thoughts are getting dreamlike, a little strange, not quite following logical pathways anymore. That's your brain beginning its shift into sleep, and that's absolutely perfect. The mushrooms will still be there tomorrow, still doing their patient work, still transforming, still connecting, still being exactly what they've been for hundreds of millions of years. You don't need to hear every word. You don't need to stay conscious. In fact, the whole purpose of this journey is to help you slip away into rest. So if you're still listening, thank you for staying with me. But please, feel completely free to drift off whenever you're ready. Let the words become just soft sounds. Let the facts become just gentle texture. Let yourself sink into sleep like a spore settling softly onto perfect substrate, finding your place of rest, ready to dream. The mycelium can respond to its environment in surprisingly sophisticated ways, growing toward food sources, avoiding toxins, finding optimal pathways between resources. Experiments have shown that mycelium can solve maze puzzles, recreate efficient network maps of transportation systems, and exhibit behaviors that look remarkably like problem-solving or intelligence, though without a brain or central nervous system. The network itself appears to process information, with signals traveling through the interconnected hyphae, allowing the organism to respond and adapt to conditions throughout its entire body. It's a different kind of intelligence, distributed rather than centralized, but effective in its own right. The mycelium reminds us that brains aren't the only way to process information, that intelligence can take many forms, that effective problem-solving can emerge from simple rules applied across a network. Maybe intelligence is less about individual brilliance and more about connection, communication, and collective processing. Maybe the smartest systems are those where information flows freely and many parts contribute to solutions. Maybe the mycelial model of intelligence, distributed, networked, patient, exploratory, is worth learning from. When a mushroom releases its spores, it's engaging in an act of profound hope and letting go. The mushroom has no control over where the spores will land, no way to guide them to optimal locations, no guarantee that any will find suitable conditions. It simply releases them in their billions, trusting that wind and rain and insects will carry at least some to places where germination is possible. It's the ultimate act of surrender, creating something, releasing it completely, accepting that outcomes are beyond control. For the mushroom, this has worked for hundreds of millions of years. Perhaps there's wisdom here for us too, about creating and releasing, about doing our work and then letting go of outcomes, about trusting processes larger than ourselves, about not needing to control every aspect of how things unfold. The mushroom creates its spores as perfectly as it can, then releases them. It doesn't follow them, doesn't worry about their fate, doesn't try to micromanage their journey. It has done its part, and that's enough. The rest is up to larger forces: wind, weather, chance, the vast network of cause and effect that governs where spores land and which ones find conditions for growth. Some cultures view fungi as neither plant nor animal, but as messengers between worlds, between earth and sky, between death and life, between the visible and invisible realms. This metaphorical understanding actually aligns quite well with scientific classification, which places fungi in their own kingdom, separate from plants and animals, with unique characteristics that don't fit neatly into either category. The ancients who saw mushrooms as between-world creatures were, in their own way, recognizing the biological truth that fungi are fundamentally different, occupying their own category of existence. They live in soil but aren't plants. They consume other organisms but aren't animals. They're visible only occasionally but exist mostly unseen. They transform the dead into food for the living. They're nature's intermediaries, her transformers, her in-between beings that remind us that not everything fits into tidy categories, that the world is more complex than binary classifications suggest, that there's wisdom in recognizing the in-between spaces, the liminal zones, the categories of existence that don't reduce to simple either-or. The cultivation of mushrooms for medicine, food, and environmental remediation represents a growing field with enormous potential. Entrepreneurs and researchers are exploring how mushrooms might help address challenges from plastic pollution to food security to mental health. Mushrooms that can break down specific pollutants, mushrooms that can provide protein-rich food from agricultural waste, mushrooms that contain compounds beneficial for human health. All of this represents not just commercial opportunity, but potential partnerships, new ways humans and fungi might cooperate for mutual benefit. We've been partnering with fungi for thousands of years in fermentation and food cultivation. Now we're discovering new ways to work together, new problems that fungal solutions might address. The mushroom isn't trying to save us. It's simply being itself, producing the enzymes and compounds it produces for its own purposes. But we're learning to recognize value in what it does, to create conditions where its natural activities also benefit human needs. It's cooperation rather than exploitation, partnership rather than domination, and perhaps this kind of thinking, working with rather than against natural processes, represents a more sustainable way forward for addressing the challenges we face. Mushroom identification teaches the value of attention to detail, noticing subtle differences in gill attachment, spore color, cap texture, stem characteristics, habitat, season, smell, and numerous other features. Two mushrooms might look similar at first glance but reveal crucial differences upon careful examination. This required attention, this practice of really looking, develops a kind of seeing that transfers to other areas of life. People who learn to identify mushrooms often report that they start noticing more in general, paying closer attention to seasons and plants and patterns, seeing complexity and detail they previously overlooked. The mushroom becomes a teacher of attention, not because it's trying to teach anything, but because learning it safely requires developing skills of observation and discernment. In a world of quick scrolls and rapid consumption, of skimming and glancing, the mushroom insists. Look carefully, take your time, notice details, don't assume. The habit of careful attention, once developed, tends to spread. You learn to look carefully at mushrooms and you might find you start looking carefully at everything. People, situations, choices, information. You become someone who doesn't just glance but truly sees. The knowledge of which mushrooms are edible, which are medicinal, and which are dangerous has been passed down through generations in a kind of oral tradition and apprenticeship. Someone who wants to learn must spend time with someone who knows, walking the woods together, examining specimens, discussing characteristics, hearing stories about mistakes and close calls and successful identifications. It's knowledge that books can support but can't entirely replace, because there's something about being in the forest with an experienced forager, seeing them notice things you would have missed, hearing them explain why they're certain of an identification, that teaches in ways that reading alone cannot. This traditional knowledge transmission is becoming rarer in many cultures, and with it, deep familiarity with wild foods and local ecosystems is fading. Perhaps there's something worth preserving here. Not just the specific information about mushrooms, but the practice of learning through relationship, through time spent together in actual places, through the transmission of knowledge embedded in practice and story, rather than abstracted into pure information. The mushroom, once again, is teaching. This time about how some knowledge works best when passed person to person, generation to generation, in the context of place and relationship, not just as data but as wisdom, not just as facts but as lived experience shared generously with those willing to learn. Many mushrooms are seasonal, appearing only during certain times of year when temperature and moisture conditions align with their requirements. Spring brings morels and certain cup fungi. Summer offers chanterelles in some regions. Autumn is the prime mushroom season in many temperate areas, with countless species fruiting as trees prepare for winter. This seasonality means that mushroom foragers live in rhythm with the year, anticipating favorite species, noting when conditions seem right, checking familiar spots when the time comes. It's a way of being connected to seasonal cycles, of having reasons to pay attention to weather patterns and temperature shifts, of having parts of the year you look forward to because they bring specific mushrooms. Modern life often insulates us from seasons. We have strawberries year-round, controlled climates in our homes and cars, artificial light extending our days. But mushroom foragers remain seasonally aware by necessity, connected to natural cycles through their attention to when and where specific mushrooms appear. The mushroom keeps them connected to Earth's rhythms, to the wheel of the year, to the patience required to wait for the right season, rather than demanding immediate access to everything always. There's something grounding about this, something that connects us to how humans lived for most of history, aware of seasons, attentive to cycles, patient with timing, gathering what's available when it's available and learning to wait for the rest. The white button mushroom, Cremini and portobello, are actually the same species at different stages of maturity and with different growing conditions. The white button is young and small. The Cremini is slightly more mature with tan color, and the portobello is fully mature with an open cap. It's remarkable that what seems like 3 different mushrooms in the grocery store are simply one species at different points in its life, marketed differently. This reveals something about how we construct categories based on appearance rather than underlying reality. We see differences that are really just stages, varieties, expressions of the same fundamental thing. Maybe this happens in other areas too. We perceive distinct categories where there's really a continuum. We draw hard lines where there are actually gradients. We miss the underlying unity because we're focused on surface differences. The mushroom, simply by being itself at different stages of maturity, teaches us to look deeper, to question apparent categories, to consider that what looks like different things might actually be one thing expressing itself in multiple ways. Unity and diversity aren't opposites. The same organism can be diverse in its expressions, while remaining fundamentally itself. Fungi contribute to carbon cycling on a global scale, storing carbon in their biomass, and in the soil organic matter they help create, while also releasing carbon dioxide through respiration as they break down organic matter. They're part of the planetary system that regulates atmospheric carbon, and their role in this system is enormous. Without fungi decomposing dead plant matter and releasing nutrients, the carbon cycle would break down. Nutrients would become locked in dead tissue, and life as we know it couldn't continue. Mycorrhizal networks also help trees absorb and store more carbon than they could alone, making fungi indirect allies in carbon sequestration. As climate concerns grow, scientists are paying more attention to soil health and the role of fungi in maintaining carbon stores in soil, rather than releasing them to the atmosphere. The humble fungus, going about its quiet business of decomposition and partnership, turns out to be a player in planetary-scale processes, a contributor to the regulation of Earth's climate, a small but essential piece of the global carbon puzzle. Once again, we find that what seems small and local is actually connected to the largest systems, that nothing exists in isolation, that the mycelium beneath your feet in your local park is part of a global network of carbon and nutrient cycling that affects the composition of the atmosphere and the stability of the climate. Everything is connected, even what seems most humble and overlooked. The concept of decomposition has negative connotations in modern culture. We see decay as failure, as loss, as something to fight against or prevent. But fungi invite us to reconsider decomposition as essential, even beautiful, the transformation of what was into what will be, the recycling that enables continuation, the breaking down that allows building up. Without decomposition, all of Earth's nutrients would eventually be locked in dead tissue, unavailable to living things, and life would grind to a halt. Decomposition is necessary. The fungi that accomplish it are doing sacred work in the truest sense, work that enables life to continue, that closes loops, that ensures that nothing is wasted, that returns all things eventually to their source. Maybe we could learn to see endings differently, to recognize completion and transformation as part of health rather than as failures. Maybe the mushroom's comfort with decay, its intimate relationship with endings, its role in transformation. Maybe this is wisdom we need, a reminder that letting go, breaking down, composting what was, these are not failures but necessary parts of any healthy system. We fear endings, fight against aging, try to preserve everything forever. The mushroom suggests a different approach. Embrace transformation, recognize the necessity of endings, understand that decay is not opposite to life but part of it. Trust that what breaks down becomes the foundation for what grows next. Some mushrooms form fairy tales come to life in their appearance. The fly agaric with its red cap and white spots looks exactly like what a child might draw when asked to picture a magical mushroom. This mushroom is both iconic and actually quite toxic, containing compounds that cause intoxication and illness, though rarely death. It has been used in shamanic practices in some cultures, and some scholars suggest it may have influenced Christmas imagery, red and white colors, associations with reindeer, who actually do seek out and eat these mushrooms in the wild, sometimes exhibiting strange behavior afterward. The line between mythology and mycology blurs here. Real mushrooms with real effects that may have inspired real practices, that then became stories, legends, images that persist in culture long after most people have forgotten the original mushroom connection. The fly agaric reminds us that culture and nature aren't separate, that our stories come from somewhere, that myths often have roots in actual experiences and observations, even if those roots are now hidden beneath layers of retelling and reinterpretation. The mushroom influenced the story. The story now shapes how we see the mushroom. Neither is more real than the other. Both are part of how meaning gets made in the interplay between human imagination and natural world. In Japanese forest bathing practices, attention to mushrooms growing on trees and forest floor is part of the whole experience of being present in the forest ecosystem. The practice isn't about exercise or getting somewhere. It's about slowing down, noticing, being present to what's actually there rather than lost in thoughts. Mushrooms, with their seasonal appearances, their variety of forms, their subtle presences, are perfect objects for this kind of gentle attention. You could walk past a shelf fungus on a tree trunk without noticing, or you could pause, really look, notice the concentric patterns, the texture, the way it's growing from the bark, the tiny insects crawling on its surface. That pause, that noticing, that moment of actually seeing what's there, that's the practice. The mushroom isn't trying to teach mindfulness. It's simply there, existing, available to be noticed if you slow down enough to see it. But in being there, in rewarding careful attention, in revealing more the longer you look, it becomes a partner in the practice of presence, a teacher of the kind of attention that notices what's easy to miss, that finds interest in the small and subtle, that doesn't need everything to be dramatic or extraordinary to be worthy of notice. The mushroom is ordinary, and in its ordinariness, it teaches us that ordinary can be fascinating if we bring enough presence to the encounter. The reproductive strategies of fungi are remarkably diverse. Some reproduce only sexually, requiring the meeting of different mating types. Others reproduce asexually, cloning themselves through fragmentation or specialized spores. Many can do both, using different strategies depending on conditions. Sexual reproduction provides genetic diversity, potentially creating offspring better adapted to changing conditions. Asexual reproduction is faster and more reliable when conditions are good and change isn't necessary. Having both options provides flexibility, the ability to clone success when that makes sense, and to create variation when circumstances suggest that adaptation might be needed. This flexibility, this capacity to reproduce in multiple ways depending on what the situation calls for, represents another successful strategy that fungi have developed over their long evolutionary history. Rigid strategies work until conditions change. Flexible strategies handle change better. The fungus doesn't choose consciously. It responds to environmental cues, using whichever reproductive mode fits current conditions. But the result is resilience, adaptability, the capacity to thrive across a wide range of circumstances, because multiple strategies are available rather than just one rigid approach. The shelf fungi that grow on trees, also called bracket fungi or conchs, can persist for years, adding new layers of growth each season, accumulating structure and mass over time. Some become quite large and substantial, like woody shelves jutting from tree trunks. These are the visible fruiting bodies of fungi that are decomposing the tree from inside, slowly breaking down wood that may have taken decades or centuries to grow. It's a slow transformation, a patient dismantling, the fungus not destroying so much as recycling, releasing nutrients back into availability, gradually turning solid wood into soft substrates that other organisms can use. The shelf fungus doesn't kill quickly. It persists, often for years, alongside its host, both tree and fungus existing together until the balance tips and the tree finally falls. Even then, the fungus continues its work, now joined by other species that colonize the fallen trunk, each taking their turn, each breaking down different components, together accomplishing what no single species could do alone: the complete recycling of a tree, the transformation of standing wood into forest floor, of structure into soil, of what was into what will be. Bioluminescent fungi might use their light to attract insects in the same way that flowers use color and scent, to recruit helpers in spore dispersal. The insects are drawn to the light, land on the mushroom, pick up spores on their bodies, and carry those spores to new locations when they fly away. It's cooperation without negotiation, partnership without agreement. The fungus provides light that the insect finds attractive. The insect provides transportation service that helps the fungus, and neither needs to understand the arrangement for it to work. Evolution creates these partnerships through blind trial and error over countless generations. Random mutations that produce light happen to attract insects. Fungi that attract insects spread their spores more effectively. Those fungi become more successful, and gradually the trait becomes established. No intelligence required, no planning, no negotiation. Just the relentless logic of what works becomes more common. And the result is magic. Mushrooms that glow in the dark, lighting up the forest floor like tiny lanterns, creating beauty as a side effect of survival strategy, reminding us that the world's wonders aren't designed for our appreciation, but that we get to appreciate them anyway. That beauty and function can be the same thing viewed from different perspectives. The death cap mushroom is responsible for the majority of mushroom-related fatalities worldwide. It looks innocuous, a pale mushroom with white gills, resembling several edible species closely enough to cause tragic confusion. The toxins it contains damage the liver and kidneys, with symptoms often delayed until after significant harm has occurred. Many fatal poisonings involve immigrants who mistake the death cap for edible species from their homeland that look similar but aren't found in their new country. It's a reminder that knowledge is contextual. An expert forager in one region may be a complete beginner in another, because species vary by geography, and knowing mushrooms in your home forest doesn't translate automatically to knowing the mushrooms somewhere else. The death cap isn't evil or malicious. It's simply protecting itself with chemical defenses that work extremely well against mammals. It exists, producing the compounds it produces, and humans must learn to recognize and avoid it. The responsibility is entirely ours. Nature doesn't adjust itself to keep us safe. We must learn to navigate nature wisely, carefully, with humility about the limits of our knowledge and respect for the power of things that look innocent but aren't. Some mushrooms are delicious when young but become bitter or tough as they age, while others remain edible throughout their lifespan. The shaggy mane must be eaten young, before it begins to auto-digest into black ink. The chicken of the woods is best when fresh and tender, becoming tough and less pleasant as it matures. These changing qualities over a single mushroom's brief life remind us that timing matters, that there are windows of opportunity that open and close, that what's perfect today might not be tomorrow. It's a lesson in paying attention, in noticing where things are in their cycle, in acting when conditions are right rather than assuming opportunity will wait indefinitely. The mushroom doesn't stay perfect forever. It has its moment, brief, beautiful, perfectly suited to harvest and eating. And then that moment passes and it becomes something else, still itself but no longer optimal for human purposes. We can learn from this about recognizing moments, about appreciating windows of opportunity, about acting when timing is right rather than hesitating until the moment has passed and the opportunity has transformed into something else. Mushroom cultivation at home has become increasingly popular, with kits available that make it easy to grow oyster, shiitake, or lion's mane mushrooms in your kitchen or garage. These kits typically consist of sterilized substrate already colonized by mycelium, needing only moisture and the right temperature to begin fruiting. It's a way to witness the fungal life cycle up close, to understand in a direct way how mushrooms develop from invisible mycelium to visible fruiting body. There's something magical about misting your mushroom log or bag and returning the next day to find tiny mushroom pins appearing. then watching over subsequent days as they swell and mature into full mushrooms ready to harvest and eat. It connects you directly to your food in a way that buying from a store cannot. Helps you understand that mushrooms are living organisms with requirements and cycles, not just commodities. Growing mushrooms teaches patience. You must wait for their schedule, not yours, and care, as they need consistent moisture and appropriate temperature. But the reward is the profound satisfaction of eating something you've grown yourself, of partnership with an organism that transforms substrate into food, of participating directly in the cycle of cultivation and harvest, rather than just consuming the end product disconnected from its origins. The fungal kingdom represents one of life's great success stories, arising over 1 billion years ago, surviving every mass extinction, adapting to nearly every terrestrial environment, forming partnerships with most plant species, developing incredible biochemical versatility, and persisting in forms from single cells to organisms covering thousands of acres. Fungi were here long before humans, and they'll almost certainly be here long after we're gone, continuing their patient work of decomposition and partnership, recycling nutrients, connecting ecosystems, breaking down whatever needs breaking down and building up whatever needs building up. There's something humbling about this long perspective, about recognizing that we're newcomers in a world that fungi have inhabited and shaped for incomprehensible spans of time. The mycelium doesn't care about human drama, human civilization, human concerns. It continues doing what it's always done, what it will likely always do, existing in its own time, following its own imperatives, succeeding through patience and persistence and adaptability, reminding us that survival isn't about dominance or intelligence or any one quality, but about finding a strategy that works, and then continuing to follow that strategy as conditions change around you. The more we learn about fungi, the more we discover connections we didn't know existed, between trees of different species, between fungi and animals, between soil health and climate, between ancient human cultures and specific mushrooms, between the structure of mycelial networks and efficient information systems. Every discovery reveals how interconnected life truly is, how much we don't yet understand, how many questions remain to be explored. Mycology is a young science in many ways, with most fungal diversity still undescribed, and most fungal relationships still poorly understood. We're just beginning to appreciate how central fungi are to ecosystem function, to soil health, to plant survival, to nutrient cycling, to countless processes we depend on but rarely think about. The mushroom you see on a walk represents not just an individual organism, but a node in vast networks of relationship and dependence. A visible sign of invisible connections, a reminder that nothing exists alone, that everything is connected to everything else in ways both obvious and subtle, direct and indirect, immediate and mediated through countless intermediaries. Lying here tonight, maybe you can imagine the fungal network spreading beneath you. Even now, even in darkness, even in winter, mycelium always growing, always exploring, always connecting, never resting completely, just slowly and patiently doing what fungi do. In forests around the world, mushrooms are emerging or decaying, spores are being released or landing, Mycelium is growing or being eaten. Partnerships are being formed or dissolved, all without fanfare, without announcement, without requiring your attention or anyone's attention. It just continues, this vast and mostly invisible kingdom of life, essential and underappreciated, powerful and humble, ancient and innovative, connecting and transforming, dying and renewing, forever engaged in the patient work of breaking down what was so that what will be can emerge. You're part of this world, resting on it, breathing in its spores, connected to it through countless visible and invisible strands. And as you drift toward sleep, perhaps you can feel that connection, that belonging, that participation in something much larger and older than yourself. The mushroom, in its quiet way, has been our companion through this gentle journey toward sleep, not demanding anything, not asking for anything, just existing in its fascinating, subtle, mysterious way, offering its stories and its wisdom to anyone patient enough to listen. Like a good companion, it has asked nothing in return for its company, has shared generously without keeping score, has simply been present in the way that mushrooms are always present, quietly, patiently, persistently, transforming what needs transforming, connecting what needs connecting, existing in its own authentic way without apology or explanation. As you close your eyes, or perhaps they've been closed for some time now, you can rest knowing that the mushrooms will still be there tomorrow, still growing in their hidden places, still fruiting when conditions are right, still doing their essential work whether anyone notices or not. They don't need your attention to validate their existence. They simply exist, and in their existence, they make the world work, make forests possible, make soil rich, make life continue in its endless cycles of transformation and renewal. Thank you for spending this time together in the quiet kingdom of fungi. May your dreams be as peaceful as a mycelial network spreading through undisturbed soil, as gentle as spores drifting on a calm breeze, as restorative as the transformation that fungi patiently accomplish. Sleep well. The mushrooms are doing their work, and you, simply by resting, are doing yours. Good night.